Mr. Everett Earl, Box 393, San Jose, California. Ernest Lee, 615 West 41st Place, Los Angeles, California. Gustav Lund, Route 3, Box 437, Sebastopol, California. What do the addressees on these 3 pieces of mail have in common? They were among the first pieces of mail to fly on a newly minted contract airmail route that spanned about 1,100 miles along the Pacific coast. Medford played an important role in the airmail industry's initial days, functioning as the only Oregon stop on that route, dubbed Contract Airmail Route 8. On September 15, 1926, airmail planes touched down and took off from Medford's Newell Barber field, mail in tow for the first time, christening the new skyway. Letters for Mr. Everett Earl, Ernest Lee, and Gustav Lund joined others in the clouds. That might not sound particularly impressive in 2023. The comings and goings of quick, relatively efficient mail is such an ingrained part of today's lifestyle, no more awe-inspiring than adhesive on stamps. But prior to the advent of airplanes, post relied on significantly slower, grounded methods to get from A to B. Horses, steamboats, stagecoaches, and trains all carried the mail, and all had their own shortcomings.
Moving the mail has changed with the mail itself. What goes in the mail is part of the equation, but the available technology is always appealing to any postal service around the world, whether it's the U.S. Postal Service or other post office departments. Everyone's trying for the same goals of speed. Everybody wants their mail to get there faster, whether it's the letters, the newspapers, the periodicals in the mail, or what we've become familiar with in current times are packages. So what is the transportation mode that's going to meet some of those demands and expectations of customers about speed? And what can you do with some of the available equipment? But part of the big factors in of course, trying to get the greatest amount of speed using some of that new equipment is the economics. What's economical, what's efficient, and how much does it take to build some of that infrastructure?
All of those transportation modes had one challenge in common: gravity. In 1859, balloonist John Wise made the first attempt to break this trend. On August 17th of that year, and in cooperation with local U.S. Postal Service employees, Wise loaded 146 letters onto a gas balloon called Jupiter. He lifted off from Lafayette, Indiana, hoping to reach New York or Philadelphia with the mail, more than 700 miles away. Instead, he made it about 30 miles due to lack of wind, and landed in the town of Crawfordsville. The 146 pieces of mail made the rest of the journey by train. But about 40 years later, a new vehicle arrived on the scene, and it would change everything.
Born in Oregon, December 18, 1903, a successful trial of a flying machine has been made near Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, by Wilbur and Orville Wright of Dayton, Ohio. The machine flew for 3 miles in the face of a wind blowing at the registered velocity of 21 miles an hour, and then gradually descended to Earth at the spot selected by the navigator. The machine has no balloon attachment, but gets its force from propellers worked by a small engine.
Less than a decade later, talk of utilizing airplanes to transport mail began. In 1910, a bill intended to authorize an investigation into the practicability and cost of an aeroplane or airship mail route was introduced, but it died in committee. The following year, Postmaster General Frank Hitchcock authorized airmail flights at a Long Island air show.
And certainly people's attention was grabbed by the new air shows going on and showing this new technology. And the Post Office Department was part of that. They had participated in some of these air shows, officially sanctioning pilots to carry mail really as sort of a commemorative piece. And those pieces of mail were postmarked with that location and date of those events and fairs. And it becomes part of the way that they're doing business and showing that the aircraft can be trustworthy enough to carry the mail. And this becomes part of when advocating for federal funds and congressional allowance to set up airmail routes and link cities.
Annual report of the Postmaster General for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 1911. The progress being made on the science of aviation encourages the hope that ultimately the regular conveyance of mail by this means may be practicable. Such a service, if found feasible, might be established in many districts where the natural conditions preclude other means of rapid transportation.
Oregon would get its first taste of this rapid transportation in August of 1912.
Sunday Oregonian, August 11th, 1912. Aviator Walter Edwards, in a 60-horsepower Curtiss, carried mail by airplane for the first time in the Pacific Northwest yesterday. In a 7-mile flight from the country club to the parade grounds at Vancouver, Washington, the daring birdman carried approximately 1,500 pieces of first-class mail matter, which he delivered to the Trans-Columbia office unscathed. "No dog will trouble me," chirped Edwards as he alighted from his thrilling battle with a 25-mile breeze. "He'd have to be a combination of a Russian staghound and a seagull, for I made the journey in exactly 12 minutes.
In 1917, Congress appropriated $100,000 for the new method of mail transport, and the following year, the post office began scheduled airmail service, initially utilizing planes and pilots from the U.S. Army Signal Corps. The pilots initially navigated the terrain by landmark, as the planes had no guiding instruments or radios to aid them during flight. A transcontinental route connecting New York City and San Francisco debuted in 1920. Soon after, radio stations started being built at airfields, so pilots could stay up to date on the weather. By 1924, airmail soared through the night too, with pilots aided by luminescent instruments, navigational lights, parachute flares, and rotating, lighted beacons. Congress acted on airmail's behalf again. The Airmail Act of 1925, also called the Kelly Act, allowed the Postmaster General to contract for airmail service with private companies, all flying along multiple mapped-out routes.
It becomes a great political debate in the early 1920s about should the Post Office Department have a fleet? What does this mean that the federal government is putting money into a fleet in these airways? And should we not open this up to private businesses to have this opportunity? And so in 1926 to 27, they transitioned to, by law, opening this up to contract airmail routes.
Contract Airmail Route 8, or CAM 8, which spanned Seattle to Los Angeles, was among the first contract routes to get mapped out. Pacific Air Transport, a company started by Oregon resident Vern Gorst, received the contract. Gorst, an entrepreneur, sold stock in his transportation company to raise the necessary funds. He purchased 10 airplanes and hired pilots to man them. During an initial survey flight of the CAM 8 route, the aircraft had multiple cities painted on the airplane's tail, pickup and drop-off stops along the way. 2 of the cities were in Oregon, Portland and Medford. But Medford would be the only Oregon city on CAM 8 where planes would actually touch down.
There weren't any decent fields between Vancouver and here. And Portland's mail came through Vancouver because Portland didn't have a decent airfield. Vancouver had the airfield. So it was kind of you go where you can go.
Medford Mail Tribune, January 7th, 1926. The Mail Tribune has frequently complained of the tendency of Eastern mapmakers to leave Medford off important highway and tourist maps by failing to bring their Oregon outlines up to date. It is, therefore, with considerable pleasure that we notice in the January National Geographic magazine an airmail map on which Medford stands out conspicuously, along with Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, as one of the principal air stations on the Pacific coast. The airmail contract for this coast service has been awarded. Medford is an important relay point, and the aggressive group of citizens responsible for this achievement are to be congratulated upon the success of their efforts.
Planes landing in Medford would hit the dirt of Newell Barber Field. Established in 1920, the airfield was named for a Medford soldier and pilot who died in World War I. The field's runway was approximately 25 feet wide and 1,500 feet long. If you bank at the Road Credit Union in South Medford, you've probably seen a monument commemorating it, placed near the old runway's south end. For comparison's sake, the Medford Airport's main runway is 8,800 feet long and 150 feet wide, with a taxiway that measures 8,800 feet long and 75 feet wide. The U.S. Forest Service originally established a base for air patrols on the hunt for forest fires in the area. And just a few years after its debut, Pacific Air Transport officials were preparing to use it for a different purpose.
Medford Mail Tribune, March 17, 1926. Flying the latest type of transport monoplane, Vern C. Gorst, president of the Pacific Air Transport Company, and R.C. Ryan, builder of the plane, at the controls, arrived here this afternoon en route to Seattle from San Diego to test flying time on the new air route. While the main purpose of the flight is to test the time of flight on the airmail route and the conditions of the landing fields, the air voyage is being made to test the kind of plane, 10 of which have been purchased for use by the transport company. With a speed of more than 110 miles per hour under heavy load and a climbing power of 2,000 feet in 2 minutes, the planes are considered to be among the best in the transportation class. They have a capacity of 600 pounds. The plane was scheduled to leave here shortly after landing to continue to journey north. The two men were joined at the aviation field by C.M. Comstock, vice president of the company, who arrived in the city this afternoon by train. The plane left at exactly 2:30 for Portland, following a 3-hour trip from San Francisco and 1 1/4 from Red Bluff.
Other test flights and a few delays followed. Gorst made lighting improvements on the route for night flyers. With 2 days to go, Medford was ready to take advantage of the new service.
Mail Tribune, September 13, 1926. Between 7,000 and 8,000 addressed letters with airmail stamps are waiting at the post office to be mailed out from here next Wednesday when the Pacific Airmail service through Medford begins, and more such addressed letters are coming to the post office with every mail from all parts of the United States to be stamped and sent out, and will continue to come, it is expected, until Wednesday morning.
One of my favorite campaign posters of the time as airmail was being established was "Airmail is socially correct." In that, if you put on a stamp that says airmail, it shows that you're paying a little extra to make sure that it's getting there as fast as it possibly can. It meant that you were showing there was some reason that you wanted to get it there that much faster.
Oakland Tribune, September 15, 1926, Medford. In the initial night of 2 planes in the Pacific Airmail service, the ship from the north arrived here at 8:38 a.m., 23 minutes behind scheduled time, and departed at 8:45 a.m. The San Francisco ship arrived here at 8:40 a.m., 15 minutes ahead of schedule, and went on at 9:30 a.m. 115 pounds and 3 ounces of mail came from Portland for Medford. The 2 planes here took on 10,040 pieces of mail, weighing 155 pounds. The plane from the south traveled in fog until it reached Mount Shasta, and from here, both foggy and clear conditions were encountered until the Rogue River Valley was reached, where clear atmosphere prevailed. An enormous crowd witnessed the landing and leave-taking of the planes, and the pilots were greeted and congratulated by city officials and local post officials.
They were just really excited and happy. People turned out in the hundreds.
Vernon Bookwalter, who arrived from Vancouver, would be the first pilot to deliver airmail to Medford on the route. Pat Patterson transported Medford's first outgoing mail to San Francisco. A few months later, Patterson died following a crash into the side of Mount Ashland during another southbound airmail flight. The tragedy underscored the dangers of airmail transport, especially for pilots flying through mountainous areas.
Oregon Statesman, December 24, 1926. Patterson suffered serious injuries a week ago today when his mail plane crashed into the side of a hill near Ashland, and it was believed he was on the road to recovery. The accident was said to have been caused by the failure of the plane's altimeter to function properly, and to the fact that Patterson was flying in a dense fog and had no idea he was so near the ground.
Time marched on. Airmail evolved. Pacific Air transport planes started carrying passengers, too. Soon after, Boeing would purchase Gorst's interest in the company, one of several acquisitions that would eventually become United Airlines. Newell Barber Field was also starting to show its age. In April 1929, the citizens of Medford overwhelmingly passed a $120,000 bond measure to start work on a new airport at the other end of town.
Mail Tribune, April 3, 1929. From the opening of the polls yesterday afternoon at 1 o'clock until they closed at 8 o'clock last evening, there was a steady stream of voters to the voting places. Never before in the history of the city was so much interest manifested in a bond election.
In 1968, the U.S. celebrated 50 years of airmail. On September 15, 1976, Medford had its own celebration, complete with a reenactment. Longtime stamp collector Leonard Lukens of the Southern Oregon Philatelic Society was part of it.
I carried the mail from the Medford post office in the old federal building. I was sworn in, and I rode in the side of the car, but we carried the mail out to the airport, gave it to people, and they put it on a plane and flew a modern-day plane south in the reenactment.
Less than a year after Medford's 50-year celebration, airmail officially ceased to be a separate class of domestic mail. Airmail is just mail now. It soars above us constantly, just as much a part of the sky as the clouds. And while you may not think about it much, know that nearly 100 years ago, Medford, Oregon was a key part of the collective runway that helped launch it skyward.
I mean, hey, we're not Portland, we're not Vancouver, we're not some spiffy place or farther south, San Francisco, but we were a first. And we really turned out for it. We really did something about it. We appreciated it. We left souvenirs behind. Important people came. And then our people passing the measure, to build a better field and everything. Hey, that's pretty doggone good for a little town, because it was a heck of a lot littler town than it is now. It's a kind of a joyful appreciation of the people of the community really caring and being gung-ho. Like, we're going to do this,